doing this work myself as the patient has made me braver, has made me more fearless, has made me more relentless, more tenacious with the places of shame, terror, rage, fury, confusion, dissociation, because I have touched them inside of myself.
How to be patient.
Welcome back to How to Be Patient. This is our first solo episode where, don't worry, Preston and I are not fighting, but we are still in residency. And so sometimes he's on nights, I'm not, and we want to be able to give you guys as many episodes week to week as we can. Today, I am joined for my first ever solo episode with Dr. Hillary McBride, whose work we are going to discuss throughout this episode, but personally, who I've been following for, I think, since medical school for like maybe 7 or 8 years online. Yeah, I know, deep parasocial relationship. And we are going to talk about spirituality, positives, and sometimes harmful parts of that for our listeners who are listening to this for their own mental health, for our listeners who work with people in the mental health field or healthcare in general and want to have a more robust language around how to think about this, as well as some in your work of embodiment and kind of the work you also do in having the podcast Other People's Problems, and
All the
everything, all of that. Yeah, we could talk for hours. We won't, but we could. We always start with a icebreaker question, even when it's just Preston and I.
Right.
And so today we are going to start with one. In reading your book and in kind of, again, knowing the background of your work, the question I thought we would start with, really easy, not at all deep question, but what are some ways that you found that sense of, I kind of think of it as just like bigness of like, oh, wow, there's some depth here. And there's some also sense of, some might call it the eternal, some might call it transcendence, some might call it just beauty. But any small moments this week that you wouldn't mind sharing that have reminded you of these positive sides that we associate with spirituality sometimes?
Mm-hmm. I mean, so many. And it won't be surprising to anyone familiar with my work to hear me say that the moments are often connected to the material, like the immanent of being embodied in the natural world. But I was thinking about, when you posed the question this week, I've got I have these places of grief and tenderness in my life that surge in different ways in different seasons. And earlier this week, I felt like it was so big inside of me. The ache, the heartache, the break was so big inside of me that it felt like I didn't know how to hold it even myself. And I got in the bathtub and I thought, okay, the water will hold me. And the bathtub wasn't big enough. And so I actually just went down to the ocean. We lived near the ocean and just got right in. And it felt like, laying there, letting my body float and undulate in the waves and feeling the way that the ocean was big enough to hold whatever was big inside of me felt like, oh yeah, this sense of being a part of and held. I have that in very tangible relational ways in lots of different contexts of my life, but there was something about knowing it felt so wordless and so right-sized to be laying with heartbreak in the ocean, letting it hold me. And so that to me feels like the one that comes to mind the quickest in that question.
Yeah. I recently was writing a lot about spending May with the writing of Mary Oliver. And one of the reasons I loved staying with it, among many, is this kind of like, can you expand your imagination to understand the way that the world holds you beyond just that which has like human language or human relationship? And so your example is just another beautiful image of that, of the embodiment of being held in the water and connected and held by that without any kind of verbal explaining, intellectualizing, but just the physical.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well framed.
Hey.
With our
We do
girl.
our best.
With our girl.
With our girl, yeah.
Mary.
I'm trying to think of mine now. Yours is like so beautiful. And I'm like, what was mine? Well, I recently finished, yesterday, I finished my 1-year psychoanalytic training I'm in Boston. And we had this clinical group that was the second half every Thursday night for a couple hours where we would unpack someone's case. And I think it was the first time like this year, this experience of it, the first time of really being in a group of people who are spending extra money, spending extra time in addition to their work to do this, but to kind of go there as a group and really interrogate in our bodies and in the emotions we bring in our cases together, like what happens. And at first that was terrifying and still is. But as we had our last session last night, kind of the feeling of like this knowing as a group what each other's kind of gives or approaches are, and kind of saying, like, I know you to be this way with patience. And when you talk
Mm.
about the hurt this patient was talking about and how what it evoked in you, I'm reminded of this and how you are. And it was just a really beautiful and in some ways for me spiritual way of
Mhm.
knowing one another, in that it was so the lines between us have blurred in a way that I haven't necessarily experienced, but it was still very like
Mhm.
a consensual blurring, but just we all show up to this space once a week and are letting each other kind of know our way of feeling ourselves through the world through this theory, but
Mhm.
also kind of, I think, more broadly, just in this work. And
Mhm.
yeah, it felt connected in another kind of like we had many words about it, but also in this
Mhm.
like wordless way um, that I've not really experienced other places.
Mm. Mm. Wow, that sounds so I'm noticing sounding or feeling surprised hearing you talk about it, like it kind of caught you
Hmm.
in some way. This
Yeah,
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 melding together, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
yeah. Of course, of course. So I guess a few things before we kind of go into the book. Um, I was wondering if you might share. I know you probably have to do this pretty frequently, but for those who aren't familiar with your work, if you might share a little bit of what you feel like you were bringing into the moment before you entered this part of your work that produced the podcast for Holy Hurt and now the book.
Mhm.
What was your work looking like before you kind of embarked more concretely on creating these two things that kind of precursored them?
Well, it's kind of hard to describe a before because the threads of exploring spiritual trauma and holy hurt run right back through to before I started publishing and talking about embodiment more.
Hmm.
Like that actually is something that people are more familiar with in my work, and yet spiritual trauma, religious abuse and how that fragments us from ourselves is intimately connected to my work in embodiment. In fact, I would say when I'm sitting with patients, there are people who come from a variety of life experiences and backgrounds and contexts sociopolitically that have a hard time being in their body. And when we explore what it is that makes being in their body so unsafe, what it is that made them leave
Hmm.
themselves, there is the traumas that are acute and obvious, the things that we would all culturally agree on are horrific.
Hmm.
And then there are the experiences that feel confusing because they were also part of um, a sense of being right or righteous or good in the eyes of a community or a family that told them your body is dangerous and sinful and needs to be disconnected
Yeah,
from the
yeah.
way you make decisions, from the way you trust, from the way you feel in the world, from who you are.
Hmm.
So when I think about embodiment and spiritual trauma, this, really it's listening to patients often that connects me to the truths that are here that feel collective and even resonant inside of me. And in hearing people talk about why their bodies felt so dangerous to them, it was surprising at first until I connected it into my own story as well. But hearing people say, my body is dangerous because I was told that it was, and it meant I was good if I believed that.
Hmm.
So that it's all interconnected,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's like I can't really separate out any of that work. And now I'm currently working on some research related to eating disorders and purity culture
Hmm.
and just looking at the way that, these systems that people think about as existing primarily within a religious context replicate values and practices that we enact in kind of our meta culture. And I think the idea that your body is bad and you can't trust yourself and it's a dangerous world and,
Mhm.
all sorts of things like that. And here are the things that you have to be good.
Yeah.
Those are themes that run through culture at large and these more micro cultures of certain religious contexts.
Yeah. I think, in writing the outline, listeners, we write outlines for every episode. In writing the outline for this episode, and even in talking with Preston and our producers about your work, I asked you that question, and as you were answering it, it just struck me that I'm trying to describe your work and how much it's resonated with me as a clinician and as just a human person in the world. And trying to explain it and all the themes together, like it sounds like many different things. And trying to, but to me, I've had the same experience in consuming and reading your work over the years of
Mm,
like, no, there's a through line. It just like is in all of these things that if you mention like what clinical topics are you interested in, it's like this, and this. And it's like, well, how do we help people feel at home in themselves and
mhm.
feel at home enough in themselves to be able to make home with others? And
Yeah.
maybe that's oversimplifying, but that's how your work has landed with me.
No, that's exactly it. Like, I think with probably the primary thrust of my work is your body is safe. Your
Mhm,
body can be trusted. Your body is you. And then looking at
mhm.
all of the different things that make us question that or disbelieve that or put that in jeopardy in some way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and some religious contexts and trauma of most sorts will do that to us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
So well, we're going to take a quick break, but when we get back, we're going to talk a little bit more about this and some more specifics around the book itself, different things talking about it, especially for people who maybe don't identify or haven't had like what we think of when we think of religious or spiritual background. And then I'm going to ask you some questions that I've been thinking about after reading the book of ethos or kind of meaning making together and how that might apply in healthcare and mental health in terms of this idea of the body is good, the body is broken. How do we make sense of suffering and what does it mean if you're good at suffering in silence alone and these power dynamics? It we will get to that after this break. Hey Preston, what does this sound remind you
Oh
of?
God, it makes me think about being on call. It's the pager.
Okay, well, it's not my pager, but it is equally stressful and is the timer I use for studying.
Oh, we got a Pomodoro Queen over here.
Do you know what has made studying less stressful though?
What?
Now you know psych. You familiar?
Am I familiar? I use Now You Know Psych for my in-training exams. Are we talking about the same thing? That excellent resource that has thousands of questions with associated flashcards, organized content in a user-friendly way?
You use it for Prite. I'm using it for the board exams. But yes, we are talking about the same
We
resource.
we can use it for both? Ayo.
Ready to take your exam prep to the next level? Go to nowyouknowpsych.com and enter the code BePatient at checkout for 20% off. That's nowyouknowpsych.com.
Hey, so I want to talk to you about this new podcast I think every clinician should be aware of. It's the Sepsis Spectrum from Sepsis Alliance, and it's done by this great critical care nurse, Nicole Kupchik.
You may be asking, why are two psychiatrists talking about sepsis? But if you've spent any time in the hospital where psychiatrists or mental health practitioners go, you know that whenever someone's mental status is altered, we can be called. And not knowing the signs of sepsis, whether that's in the ICU, the ED, or other places in the hospital, can mean that we're missing things alongside the team for things that'll really impact our patients.
Yeah, I mean, delirium comes on quick and fast, and you have to keep it on your differential. It's hit me on the inpatient psych floor, and
Mm.
even for nurses that work in mental health and don't think they're going to come across this stuff, it's going to come across you. So it's important just to keep it on your radar, and I think this is a great resource for it. So if you want, you can listen to the Sepsis Spectrum wherever you get your podcasts, or you can watch it on Sepsis Alliance's YouTube channel.
To learn how you can earn free nursing CE credits just by listening, visit sepsispodcast.org. That's SEPSIS podcast.org for more information. So, one question I wanted to frame for our listeners with you is I think that at least I know you're based in Canada, I'm based in the US. sometimes it can feel, as someone who is just now finishing training and is, maybe a younger clinician, that this question of, unless someone is coming from a spiritual background themselves or a religious background themselves, as someone working in mental health, it can kind of feel like overwhelming, or for some people can be like, I don't really understand this world or this part of the world for my patient. And so I wonder, when you think about this book, you mention a few times in the book, maybe you're someone in a religious setting, or you're someone who knows someone in a religious setting, and you're reading this so you can understand and care for them better. I wonder how you might posit that this book could help people working in mental health care, even if they're not someone who necessarily identifies with this idea of, they don't necessarily naturally find resonance with
Right.
spirituality or spiritual trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. So many, many ways, many things come to mind. I think the first is that even if we don't resonate with being a spiritual person, I think our definition of spirituality needs to be rehabilitated such that we actually get access to even more of ourselves, and then have points of entry for our patients and our clients. And the definitions of spirituality that I really like, and I'll share like an aggregate version of that, is the inborn human drive and desire to make meaning, to feel connected, to belong, to be a part of something bigger than ourselves, to expand. And so if I would ask the question, have you ever asked, why are we here? Or why did this happen? This is proof of your spirituality. If you've ever asked, what would it be like to not feel so alone in this? Or if you've ever felt like there's something inside of me I just have to get out, and it feels like it's just coming through me, even though I don't really even understand it. It's not pre-planned. It just feels like, I'm getting this spark of something, or have felt resonant energy with even any other form of aliveness. Like if the trees breathe has sparked a sense of communion with nature, you're spiritual. So spirituality is written into us as people. And for those listeners who might think, well, I'm not spiritual, maybe what I'd say is, I think that spirituality has often been conflated with the spiritual practices that people engage in to satisfy their spiritual longings, or has been conflated with the cultures of people who do that. And we would call religion cultures. It's a culture of people who answer spiritual questions in a similar way that kind of satisfies their longing, or maybe anesthetizes the spiritual pain or questions that they have. So spirituality is in and through all of us. And if we're not recognizing that, we're probably missing things in our patients, in the questions we ask, in the way that we understand how their pain lives in them. And we look at the legacy of the resources that they have, as well as the wounds or injuries that they experience. But another piece of this too is that I would say that, it's a pretty conservative opinion to suggest that trauma shatters something in the soul. That trauma, whether it's a single incident trauma with an index event that's really neatly tidied into a before, during, and after, right? Which like very easy to diagnose because it's so concrete and objective, as if it was all that
We love
way.
to be objective.
Right, don't we? Yeah. Yeah, that like even in those experiences, the thing that defines it as trauma is not that it was stressful. It's that it ruptured something inside of us in terms of being fractured existentially. And what I love, maybe I'll just kind of soapbox for 1 second on this
Please
point.
do. Please
What
do.
I love about the history of traumatology and the resurgence of literature and empirical research about trauma responses and symptomatology is that it has centered the body again in the conversation. So because of trauma, I think we actually have more discourse in psychotherapy about the body, really. The problem is that if we reduce trauma down to physiological symptoms, we miss the complexity of the absolute shattering of the self that happens. Like to minimize trauma to dissociation, flashbacks, terror, avoidance, mood changes, misses.
PCL5.
Like,
Just
yeah, right,
a screen.
exactly. you miss the way that it is at the core of being human, completely altering the experience of being alive, such that there is never any going back to a before.
Yes.
And this is first talked about Genet talks about it, Freud talks about it. We have more recent theorists who would talk about it. I'm just even thinking about like the theory that the shattered assumptions theory comes to mind, where like to describe the way that trauma shatters the entire worldview that we had that up until a certain point led us to believe we're safe,
Right.
we're loved, it's okay to be us, our bodies are good. There is no coming through trauma with your assumptions of the world and yourself intact. So when we're talking about shattered assumptions, what we're talking about is the domain of the spiritual. Like, what does it mean to be me in the world? Why do bad things happen? Where do I go with that? So this is all just to make my point and to drive the point home that if we're not thinking about any trauma through the lens of spirituality, we're missing the way that it lands in people. We're missing the phenomenological, the qualitative, the lived experience of being powerless, terrorized, abandoned, neglected. And some scholars would say something inside of you dies, right? Something inside of you dies in trauma. So trauma is inherently spiritual. And then we also have this other kind of spiritual trauma that I'm talking about in the book. And I'll just give a helpful series of definitions or axes through which we can relate to that when it has just a little bit more of an affiliation with spiritual practices or religious context. We'd say that spiritual trauma is any trauma caused by something that a person closely associates with religion or spirituality. And that could include clergy abuse all the way to I was in the middle of praying when a bad thing happened.
Right.
And because brains are association making organs, they're really good at pairing things together. Spiritual trauma could also be inflicted by someone who's a stand-in for the divine.
Yeah.
And there are, again, lots of scholars who would say, who are our first divine figures? Parents.
Yeah.
Right. So we're like, oh shit. Okay. There's no getting away from this being all trauma being spiritual, right? Like, okay. I get your point, but I'll go on. Trauma that's justified by spiritual practices or beliefs. So public shaming, because someone doesn't agree with or steps outside of a boundary in a spiritual context, ritual or occultic abuse, or occurs because of the religious or spiritual practice. So there could be lots of different examples of that, but the point in all of those definitions is somehow to the person, spirituality or religion and whatever felt traumatic or was traumatic become intertwined, even if it doesn't happen within the walls of a church.
Right.
There's also two other pieces, and this, I'm pulling here from Michelle Panchuk's work. She's a philosopher who's written about spiritual trauma and probably has given the most useful definitions that I've found in the academic literature. But she also says that spiritual trauma includes the survivor believing that spirituality or religion was somehow the cause, and that post-trauma responses are connected to religion or spirituality or God in some way, which includes, you think about this is where it starts to get a little murky and we can kind of feel like, oh, I'm pulling the thread and everything becomes unraveled.
Which is what I love in your work.
Great. Well,
I'm
then
like,
here,
oh.
you signed up for it.
I'm here. I'm like, yes.
Is that if we think about spirituality as also our inborn meaning-making drive and the way that we answer the meaning-making questions we have inside of us, and then spiritual trauma being, something that a survivor believes, like the trauma is something that the survivor believes is connected to spirituality in some way. Essentially, there's no way for us to not have our meaning-making systems affected, which again means all trauma shatters something. And what is it shattering? We could look at fragmentation and subcortical, cortical structures, and we could look at changes in autonomic nervous system processes. But in terms of what it feels like to be human, usually it's this, like the ground underneath me is gone.
Right. It makes me think of, grief is like a little bit sometimes simpler, sometimes trauma. But the way that often people with grief talk about, like, there's this before and there's an after. I think
Mhm.
often that can be more quote unquote simple loss, but the same feeling of the shattering, like
Mm.
who I was before this happened is not the same person I am now.
Yeah.
Even if we don't take that to a place where it's like, and I have secondary moral judgment or secondary emotions inhibiting that or all these other things, like there is something significant that has happened here that has made me almost unrecognizable to
Mhm.
myself.
Mhm. Yeah. Well said.
I wonder, I guess one of the threads that you are saying with this is this like interconnection with meaning making, spiritual systems, religious experiences, but also that like kind of thinking of how we now think about illness in psychiatry with more of like a circuit approach. And it's sort of like a circuit where it's like hit one of these things and the function that they all were connected to may become different, may become shattered. Um, and I think you've also put really well into words, both here and in your book, how this impacts not just people who are thinking about the kind of, in some ways, pop culture pithy thrown around, like, this is what it means. And I can say this as a Catholic, like, oh, that's Catholic guilt. That's da 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 da, right? There's a way in
Mhm.
which we understandably oversimplify some of these things in like the culture. And I wonder what your thoughts are in terms of, or maybe more than your thoughts, what's your experience been being someone writing about this, thinking about it, the thread always being there, while yourself being a psychologist? Like
Mhm.
that there, at least in my experience in psychiatry, there is sometimes this still somewhat held notion that these are separate things, or that there's this sort of view in the community of providers of religions over here. Maybe it's also being on the East Coast,
Mhm.
like kind of
Mhm.
like psychoanalysis is over here. We can
Mhm.
talk about their religion, but also we're going to analyze their religion. We're going to be distant from it. We're going to put it into this box that is outside of the science and objective reality we're doing. And so I guess I wonder what your experience has been both being an academic and then doing this work that kind of pushes at the maybe boundaries and walls that academia is comfortable exploring
Mm.
in terms of how it thinks about religion and mental health.
Mhm. It doesn't actually seem surprising to me. And maybe that's because I carry contradictions inside of myself or complexity or haven't been able to bifurcate different like qualities of my sense of identity or experience. It feels so impossible to separate any of the things, any of the facets of the human experience from the other that
Mhm.
like I maybe the angle that I come at it from might be a critical perspective to say I think psychology has done a really bad job
Mm.
of honoring the inherently spiritual nature of our beingness, and thus has
Mhm.
missed incredible opportunities to resource people. And subsequently, we've missed the way that, like, in a cursory understanding of religion, missed the way that religion and religious experiences can be harmful for people. That the
Mhm.
assumption that when we do talk about religion, often in kind of like mainstream like I'm thinking about empirical research
Yeah.
and like theory that's published. Like really, like if you look at the research literature about spiritual trauma
Mhm.
until about 15 years ago, 20
Yeah.
years ago, all you're seeing is that those two words, religion and trauma, only go together when we're talking about post traumatic growth.
Hmm.
That people would see
It's
trauma
interesting.
the religion could be an antidote
Yeah.
to trauma, that it's part of post-trauma meaning-making
Mhm.
experiences, and there is some really interesting research that says that people who have a particular kind of religious persuasion might fare better
Right.
or have a different we'll just say a different presentation of symptoms post-trauma than or crisis than others, but I think it's interesting to say, like, well, in I think our strategy, particularly in counseling psychology or positive psychology, to
Mhm.
rehumanize and integrate religion as a potential resource and source for flourishing, we've missed the way that religious experiences and communities can also be part of doing harm.
Right.
So I think my maybe my stance as a psychologist
Uh-huh.
has also been informed by you asked about my experience of feeling
Uh-huh.
like my spirituality has been one of my greatest assets,
Uh-huh.
and some spiritual experiences that I've had have directly causally impacted my own mental illness presentations. Like, I can't not know both of those are true.
Yeah.
I can't not
Yeah.
see those in
You're
my
like, I've lived
patients.
it.
And
I am living it. Like,
yeah. And it
yeah.
is like, it is interesting. I have a colleague who he's a theologian, Dr. Preston Hill, and when he talks about this, his argument is that there is some really good when we're looking at the biblical scriptures, when we're looking at, sacred texts from the Christian
Uh-huh.
tradition, that there's some really good arguments that the person of Jesus, as written about in the scriptures, makes that we can reason from our experience to know something about what is sacred, what is holy, what is divine, that we can actually reason from psychology to better
Uh-huh.
understand religion. I don't know a lot of religious traditions which might have said, agreed with that or said
Yeah.
that like I think religion has done just as much to separate itself from psychology. And yet I would say, maybe this is coming back to the felt sense of embodied wisdom or
Uh-huh.
sacred knowledge or ancestral knowledge or
Uh-huh.
decolonizing knowledge. But it feels like sometimes like truth is truth.
Uh-huh.
And there are things that feel reliably human and essential in what they
Uh-huh.
reveal about who we are and what we need, including that we're all asking questions about meaning and we all have like relational systems and minds and bodies, and all of that is working together to shape what it feels like to be us. So, I mean,
Mhm.
it's like not a very clear answer to your question, but I
I
think
didn't have you on here because
just
I wanted it clear.
okay.
I can read the DSM.
These are like the musings that come to mind.
Hey, when we posted that you were coming on, we had a lot of messages that were like, "This is my favorite overlap." Like, I'm so
Oh,
excited for this.
yeah.
Um, I think one of the things that I've known from your prior work and from your book, The Wisdom of Your Body, which my eating disorder patients are sick of me quoting to them, I think at times, and also not sick of it. They enjoy it.
Mhm.
But I know one of your modalities or ways you've been trained as a therapist has been in AEDP, which I think
Mhm.
I'm gonna misspeak about the is it accelerated experiential dynamic
Dynamic.
psychotherapy? Is that
Yeah.
right?
Think of like somatic, growth oriented, attachment based psychodynamic work.
Okay. Yeah. Is there and you mentioned this in this book as well in terms of understanding of kind of integration of emotion, inhibition of that emotion, and then the core state. I wonder,
Mhm.
just not everyone. Some of us are psychiatrists on our way or med students.
Mhm.
I don't know if that is the modality that you primarily now kind of view yourself as living in, with probably eclectic things like all of us have from other
Mhm.
parts. Um, I wonder though if you could describe that modality, if it is the primary one you identify with, and how you work with people, because I think it is beyond being in a chapter, is so much of what we're talking about with this understanding of being experiential, embodied, and the emotional work. My
Mhm.
understanding of you has been so much is informed by your own experience, but also your experience of learning from patients through this
Mhm.
mode of therapy.
Mhm. Yeah. So the question is like, if I could give like a brief summary of what it means to do that work, or kind of the theory of
Yeah.
change or theory of psychopathology or something like that. Just what would,
Yeah. I think
okay.
I know what it is. And so
Okay.
I'm sorry putting you in this
No,
box, but
no, 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 no. Yeah.
I I think learning about it through you
Mm,
talking about it, um, I myself am ACT and psychoanalytic at this
mm,
point,
mhm,
but
mhm,
I think the description of it and what it means to enter into the emotion with people, how you've
mhm,
described it in the books at least, has been something that made me start to think differently of how therapy is working. So maybe the theory of change in it, or like what's working or
mhm.
happening when you're doing that therapy, might be a way to
Yeah.
get at it.
A central component to this kind of work is paying attention to what's happening somatically and affectively and what's happening relationally and interpersonally. And the reason for that is because humans, like human systems intrapsychically, learn about what to do with emotion based on what's happening in interpersonal dynamics. We learn, and this would be probably in your theoretical frameworks, you use this language too, the language of defensive exclusion, that when life is really hard, like actually human beings are wired to be able to face incredibly hard things. We come from, ancestors who have survived the unimaginable. And yet what is it that moves what's unimaginably challenging into the
Mhm.
realm of suffering, illness, disorder, disability? When we're looking at it from that language, like a person becomes unable to
Mhm.
live.
Mhm.
And we would say that there's this process that happens when these are the words of Diana Fosha, who's one of the main developers of the theory. She would say that in the face of overwhelming emotion, when we were alone with it in a
Mhm.
way that was unwanted, like we have no other choice but to defensively exclude the truth and the reality of our knowing and of our pain. Said another way, in the face of unwanted and unwilled and unwanted aloneness in the face of overwhelming emotion is the thing that drives us to exclude what we
Mhm.
know to be true inside of ourselves. And so therein lies the kind of the crux of where so much of our distress comes from, that we have
Mhm.
the pain of being human, which when we look at it in very early developmental experiences can be, I don't want my mom to go to work,
Mhm.
or my brother took my truck, or I'm scared because I don't know what's going to happen next.
Mhm.
But these experiences that feel huge and overwhelming for us, that we don't have meaning making structures for, yet we rely on other people around us to help us
Mhm.
organize our experience, to tolerate the distress, and to come through to the other side. And if we don't have that, our body doesn't learn the maps of how to stay with the distress. And so
Mhm.
we have no choice, given that distress is part of being human and affect is part of being human. We have no choice but to find other kind of strategies, tactical defenses, relational process defenses that
Mhm.
move us away from our distress. And that includes, there's a whole other category of affect, which is suppressive, that
Mhm.
we can make use of other kinds of emotions to inhibit the core emotions that are essential for our self-knowing, survival, connection, and flourishing. And really, I think the therapeutic process is about identifying what is no longer working that once worked.
Mhm.
And we would call those our defenses. Anything from avoiding to blaming, or violence or self-harm, or even
Mhm.
I would include depression or
Yeah.
dissociation as a defense. Again, not that it's intentional or cognitive, which is part of why this is um, a psychodynamic based model, that we're
Right.
looking at these kind of unconscious processes that are at play. But identifying what's no longer working
Mhm.
and what it's working at
Mhm.
keeping us away from, what it's inhibiting us or defending us from feeling. And when we can
Mhm.
connect in with what's at the core of what's going on, of what's hard, and we have somebody with us who's not afraid, who's engaged, who's emotionally present, who's skilled, who's unfazed, who's
Mhm.
entering into that process with us, we can begin to complete the action tendency or the affect tendency, or the swell of energy that our body wants to release, which
Mhm.
resolves to bringing us back to rest and calm and the core of who we are, our creative, courageous, compassionate self.
Right.
But I would say that, really this model is, can we be together with what's been unbearable to be with?
Mhm.
And when we can be together with what's been unbearable to be with, it all of a sudden becomes bearable. And when it becomes bearable, you can organize it, you can resolve it, you can feel it, you can actually enter into it in a way that brings you more home to yourself.
And with that, the connection to someone else, the ability to let them not just into that, or let the therapist or whoever's doing it into it, but to have also capacity to create a bidirectional way that now other people can also do that with you.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, when I'm teaching about it, I like to say in therapy, we're often creating relational imprints on the place that has been characterized by aloneness. So if you think about emotion like terror or sadness as a
mhm.
place, That's a place, it's like a world that likely nobody else has entered into, not long enough to really explore it, check it out, understand it, get to know what it needs, help to really like hear the message and work it through. And so when we bring presence into the place of affect, we leave the imprint of relationship, which allows a person to walk away from our work going, "Oh, people can exist here with me. And if people can
Yeah.
exist here with me, then I can invite other people into this. And I can do that in a way that trusts that, okay, there'll be other people who will come and join me in
Mhm.
this, and I'll be able to talk about it, and it will feel better on the other side. And then I won't feel as stuck in the mismanagement
Right.
of the place that actually just needs to be felt and accompanied."
And it's like the classic positive spiral as well. It's like, and then I
Yes.
notice I'm of use and I have these relationships that reaffirm and repeat this corrective emotional, belonging or being with.
Yeah.
And I feel more able to explore out in the world and all of
Right.
these things happen.
Right. Or like, wow, I actually want to enter into this with someone else because I have the capacity because I'm not afraid to touch in on that place inside of me. Like I think the fallacy that psychotherapy creates more narcissistic, individualistic people is
Hmm.
actually when we're using models of treatment that are non-relational, because relational
Yes.
work, when it meets the needs that are inherently human, like to connect and to be seen and to belong and to know that we matter,
Hmm.
actually it writes something inside of us that allows us to then say, I can now do this for other people. I will tell you unequivocally, with with absolute certainty, that doing this work myself as the patient has
Hmm.
made me braver, has made me more fearless, has made me more relentless, more tenacious with the places of shame, terror, rage, fury, confusion,
Hmm.
dissociation,
Hmm.
because I have touched them inside of myself. And what made it possible is people who said, I'm not afraid to go there inside of you, which is
Yeah.
immediately and directly transferred to my ability to say to someone else, I'm not afraid to go there in you either.
1000%. That has been my experience as someone who got very good, uncomfortable, but very good, like, relational therapy myself. And then the ability to be with patients is, I feel that every day, the pouring forth from the place where I was, like, poured into, and not in the religious way of, like, you were given this is not all religion. There was, in the religious circle I was in, kind of a, like, you have been given much by others and now you owe it to others. It's not the compulsive way as much as it's the,
Or the
"Oh,
obligation.
yeah, something opened here." Um,
Mhm.
I'm struck by the feeling of just how beautiful that it is to be in the space of being able to do that with people and being given the gift of, like, having someone show you that the things that you think are, like, monstrous or isolated islands within you are actually, like, in them too. And I don't know, there's a quote, I think, from Terence, who's like a Greek philosopher, who said, like, "Nothing human is alien to me."
Mhm.
Um, and it just came to mind when you said
Mhm.
that, of the, like, yes, we can see it together. And it's
Mhm.
a little scary. Like, it's a little scary, but that's okay. We're here and we're doing it together.
Mhm.
When you were
Mhm.
talking about that, it did bring me back kind of directly to the book and thinking about some of the ways that can be in a culture or a religion or a spiritual culture that I want to leave space that there can be ways religion can teach us to maybe respond in these ways to emotion, or what wouldn't be called emotion in the religion, but like a rising of whether it's prayer, inspiration, connecting to God, connecting to others. But that there are a lot of ways that these religious cultures can make us be much more phobic of these
Mhm.
scary places in ourselves by giving it names of what it means in terms of our existential fate or the kind of essence of what
Mhm.
it means to be human. I wonder if there are things, this is a large question, this is basically the book, but kind of things that come up most frequently or in mind are top of mind to you, of how maybe the lowercase t trauma, but the, like, formation or the water people swim in can make them more phobic of these emotions from a religious standpoint, or these kind of increase this terror of something is bad in me or something cannot be seen by others as emotionally.
Mhm. And you're asking for examples or like just to say a little bit more about how that happens in religious contexts?
Yeah, I think either examples or just ways that can come up for people and for our listeners hearing this that maybe is like, oh, okay, that's something that could be part of why this feels like such a strong belief that keeps coming up. And maybe as someone outside that circle, it kind of feels like, where is this? Like as the therapist.
Yeah. Well, I think that the important distinction here is that sin, or the language of sin, as a construct in many religious contexts, is used as a brokering tool for control and fear. And ultimately, the language of sin is about defining separation from God, who is seen to be often, outside of present moment embodied experience, but somehow available, and that it's tenuous. It could be threatened, but it's eternal, and it's the most important thing that matters. So for people, the language of sin is used in a very heavy-handed way to, as I mentioned, support behavioral control. Like threats of that being sinful really evoke really strong fear responses. And one of the things that is often used or talked about as sin is many different kinds of emotions, or any kind of bodily knowing or wanting or desire, right? Fear. Often people are told fear is proof that you're sinning because you're not trusting God
Mm.
enough. Or if you desire, right, just anything at all and it isn't God, right? This is proof that your heart is evil and
Mm.
you're bad at your core. So there's these kind of like self-reinforcing loops that can happen where people are told this is proof that your body is bad and that you are bad. And usually it comes down to wants and emotions. And when those things come up, those things may actually be like really, really normal human experiences. But because people aren't given skills and strategies and information and education and resources around how to be with them, they can sometimes feel kind of unruly or scary or out
Mhm.
of control. Like they do kind of take over because there hasn't been any support around actually being with them.
Mhm.
But then the scapegoating process happens where people see that the thing that shouldn't have happened happens, and it's proof that I'm bad and that I can't
Mm.
trust myself, which supports the the deferring of spiritual authority to another person.
Mm.
Someone outside of me gets to decide what is right and true because I obviously can't
I
trust
can't do it.
myself.
Yeah.
I can't trust. Yeah, I can't do it.
And to
So
consider
there.
that I could do it is in itself
Oh,
pride.
right,
And I
exactly.
double need
Yeah.
help now.
Right, yeah, exactly, now I'm really in trouble. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so there's that, and then I think then there's the valorization of spiritual practices, which are used as bypassing techniques. So let's just say we've got this kind of two-factor thing happening. We've got people saying, I'm feeling something and I'm not supposed to be feeling it. And it feels kind of wild and I don't know what to do with it. And it's going to lead me in the different direction than I'm told I should act or think or behave. So here's this bad thing.
Mhm.
And I'm being told it's bad. But then I'm also being praised for when I suppress that bad thing,
Mhm.
for using any kind of spiritual strategy or language or words I've memorized
Mhm.
or behavior in some
Mhm.
way to suppress. Oh, that feels really good. So there's like the being connected to myself feels bad and I'm told it's bad. The getting away from it actually
Mhm.
is rewarded socially.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot to think about this, to realize, wow, this is creating experiences for people where they are profoundly separated from themselves and are led to believe that it's the best way to be, that it's ideal. In fact, like when I'm writing about this and thinking about this, the language that I keep coming back to is the moralization of the infantilization of the psychological self,
Yes.
that the person who is psychologically immature is seen as being more morally or spiritually mature, but they have no contact to themselves.
Mhm.
It's terrifying inside.
Mm.
No awareness of how I actually think for myself, who I actually am for myself, or connection to my body. But in this kind of really mysterious way, this is considered morally superior, virtuous, right? Ideal. It's like a complicated mess for people who are navigating coming out of some of these religious contexts.
That's what I was gonna
And again,
say. Yeah.
it's not not all religious practices or traditions are like this, but I think the ones that get the most airtime and have the most evangelical flavor to them or
Mhm.
colonizing flavor to them that kind of
Mhm.
have this like
Mhm.
reach or spread or are trying to bring people into this kind of community. There are qualities of
Yeah.
this that,
Yeah.
yeah, can be really damaging for people.
Well, and there's the way that it can pick up, like, the kind of even people who are not raised in this setting, that but, like, if you're feeling pain and you're feeling loneliness, as so many people are in recent years, there is something intoxicating, I think, and I say this as someone who's experienced it, I think, at different points in my life from the being intoxicated by it. The fantasy that and the, like, group think, group conviction that your pain will finally go away, you will
Mm,
finally feel okay and belonging in the world if you just learn to deal with your emotions in this way or your
mm,
internal state. And how I mean, I think a lot of times we talk about what makes someone more likely to, like, go into a high control group. People talk about this with, like, explicitly, like, cults and things like that. But often the people who are vulnerable to that, like, where is the robust experience of a different way of dealing with emotions that would let you know from experience that this to reject it, right? I can't you can't read a book and be like, I'm now going to understand how to do this. I'm now going to have the emotional kind of skill Rolodex to just see that this is not the right way to go about it. It's like you are in pain. You have been in pain often for a long time. And this group does seem happier. And more than that, the intoxicating part is they're letting you in and they're giving you an answer.
mm,
And I don't think that's just present in cults. I think there can be something in that. And this is this is where I get controversial. In even if you think about training and like working in mental health, like the idea of having an answer that will solve pain can be present in our field. I think as someone who comes from a religious background and could kind of feel that transition of like black and white thinking to then earlier having like, oh, it's just black and white thinking with a different God. Um, I I wonder if there are times when we fall into this as someone who I think has fallen into this in the field of utilizing these control or these like high certainty. Like we have the set of answers, even in a field when we're supposed to be kind of helping people escape from this type of rigid way of thinking.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah. We could do the same thing just with different packaging.
I'm recognizing we're nearing the end of our hour together, which means, that we covered everything that we could possibly cover. I'm just kidding. There's so much we could talk about. I'm wondering as we move to, ending our time together, if there's someone who's hesitating to pick up your book, maybe they're nervous about it, maybe they feel it might apply to them, but they're kind of looking at it and it makes their stomach drop. I
Mhm.
wonder what you might say to them.
Mhm. Me too. I start
Yeah,
the book
that's
by
fair.
saying, "I don't think I wanted to write this. I didn't
Yeah.
wanna write this." And I
Yeah.
I really avoided doing it for a long time because I know these places, and so my what I can promise the reader is me too, like an undoing of aloneness by saying every question I ask, every place I went, I've gone to. And so I can tell you, if you go there, you can find perhaps somewhere in the memory of your consciousness or awareness the possibility that I know that place and that therefore it wouldn't have to be so alone.
Yeah. It was a very beautiful start to the book and a start with also a lot of permission, which is, important in all trauma work. But I think especially when you're coming at this and you might be someone with a religious or spiritual background where the urge towards conviction or confession or, really performing the right emotions or beliefs. I think being able to be like, also, you could stop reading this and it's not a sin. Like, or this doesn't feel
Yeah.
so good. Just take a sec. Maybe just go on a walk instead.
Yeah.
Come back if you want is a, a beautiful and, very trauma informed, also very informed by all my understanding of your previous work way of beginning this book. I was kind of scared to read it. And I've been thinking about this stuff for years and, my own way. And, like we started talking about with the episode, the threads go so deep and connect to everything. And it reading it and talking with you about it has been, I think, more so just a comforting and enlivening way of letting this in and thinking about it in a new way. So I, for one, am very glad that you put yourself through the pain of writing and discomfort
Thank you.
of
Me
writing
too.
this book for the world.
Me too. On the other side, I am too.
If people would like to, obviously, Holy Hurt is out now. Have it here. Your other books are also out. If people want to find other places where you are online, where can they connect with you off the page?
Yeah, Other People's Problems, my podcast on CBC has just come out so that you can listen to me do some clinical work there. On Instagram and most of the social channels, Hillary Leanna McBride, my website, HillaryLMcBride.com. And I post events. I have a newsletter you can sign up for if you want to hear about events I'm doing and don't want to do the social media thing.
Been to one of the virtual versions of your events, the Sacred Feminine one.
Yeah, so fun.
It was great. They're great.
Mm.
Well, thank you so much for spending part of your Friday afternoon with us here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the conversation. It felt like such a sweet home to make with you here in conversational territory.
Thank you guys so much for listening to our first solo episode. Please be nice to me about it because I was scared to do it. But we're hoping that this can allow us to have other conversations, allow flexibility for our guests and for us as trainees to make sure we continue to get you guys content for your Monday morning commutes, rounding, or post nights. As always, the reviews and how you interact with us on socials helps us to shape the podcast and to make it more applicable to what is the most interesting and helpful. For people who leave us reviews, especially the Apple Podcast reviews, we read them, we try to integrate them. Shout out to one recently from Evergreen Alto. I regularly tell my friends that I think that they'd make this podcast specifically for me. Every time a new episode comes out, the topic pleasantly surprises me. I could never be a medical doctor, but I've always been super interested in psych, and I am a scientist, so the focus on science, research, and clinical work is fascinating to me. Preston and Margaret are so funny, thank you. They regularly make me laugh out loud, quickly becoming one of my favorite podcasts. And then they have a little heart at the end, so if you're watching the video, it's here. Thank you for leaving that review, and thank you guys who help us to kind of get the podcast out there through reviews and shares on social. If you want to talk to us more, come chat with us and everyone at our Human Content Podcast family. We're on Instagram and TikTok at Human Content Pods, or you can contact us directly at howtobepatientpod.com. You can see more from both Preston, who's not here, but from Preston and from me, either on the full episodes or on Preston's YouTube. You can follow him also on Instagram or TikTok, and I am on TikTok and Substack, both as Bad Art Every Day and Instagram very occasionally. As I said, full episodes are on YouTube under Preston's channel. I'm your host, Margaret Duncan, and Preston usually Roche. Our executive producers are Preston Roche, Margaret Duncan, Will Flannery, Kristen Flannery, Aaron Corney, Rob Goldman, and Shanti Brooke. Our editor and engineer is Jason Portizo, and our music is by Omer Bensby. To learn about our program disclaimer and ethics policy, submission verification and licensing terms, and our HIPAA release terms, go to our website at howtobepatientpod.com, or you can reach out to us at howtobepatient@human-content.com with any questions or concerns. As always, How to Be Patient is a human content production. Bye, guys.
How to be patient.
Thank you for watching. If you want to see more of us, or if you want to see, this is Lilac, she's my cat. She's going to be waving her hand at one of the floating boxes, which will lead to more episodes. Lilac, point to the other episodes. Lilac doesn't know what the internet is, but I swear they're there. They probably exist for real. But in the meantime, I'm just going to pet Lilac, and then I'm going to go dance in the background.